Okay, we are starting Carl Rogers, person-centered, and this is obviously fall 2020, so this is the last time I used this particular presentation, so ignore that, please. I will change that at some point, but there's Carl. He is probably the most influential theorist. He lived quite a long time. Um, you read about Carl Rogers, much like the other theorists, you see that his family upbringing influenced his theoretical development in that he was discouraged from play. His boyhood was lonely, and he pursued scholarly interests instead of social. And so you see how that probably influenced the relational aspect of what he developed here. He really applied all of his work in the last year of his life to world peace by training world leaders in conflict resolution. He was the first to formulate a theory of personality and psychotherapy grounded in research. Um, he really was developed a theory of psychotherapy that focused on strengths. He was not afraid to take a strong position. He was the recipient of a Nobel Peace Prize. And one of the other really influential people in the field was actually his daughter, Natalie Rogers, as well. Natalie did pass away when this text was written that I teach out of, or one of the editions. She was not deceased. So she died recently, and she's responsible for expressive arts therapy. And expressive art therapy is really fascinating. She developed the concept of the creative connection, a process where the client or group member is invited to access inner feelings through an uninterrupted sequence of movement, sound, visual art, and journal writing. And as the client moves through that process, they start to uncover unconscious aspects of self, and insights are shared with the therapist. This is what she felt was lacking in her father's work, and her art was one vehicle to try to connect with that. Um, I already said all of this, but she is, let's see, anything else I want to say about her? The patriarchal system, yes. She expressed her anger at her father because he was unknowingly a part of the patriarchal system. He was surprised but open to learning. After hearing about the role he and other men played in holding women back, he changed many of his ways of being and writing. So she had an influence on her father as a feminist, which is really fascinating and awesome to me. So there's an evolution of person-centered. It's called, and we, in the first section, chapter of Foundations, when we talked about history, when this started in the 40s, right? Remember that? Um, it was called, I think, non-directive counseling first. And in my notes, you please use the notes in my slides because they'll be very helpful for you. But there are these stages, and non-directive counseling was where we started. And he has had an aversion to direct traditional therapy. So he was very non-directive. And I'm going to try to upload a Gloria tape for you guys so you can watch Gloria and you can actually see him in action. Making a note so I don't forget to do that. It's also going to cut down on our time in class where, and if you do all this before class, we can process and really, I'm going to put tape of Gloria so I can put that up so you can see. He's very, probably too non-directive. And then in the 50s, it shifted to client-centered, honoring the client's ability to lead the therapy process. So it's shifted a bit to more of a client-centered approach. And in that client-centered approach, he focused on more of the actualizing tendencies, like the motivational forces leading client to change. He's talking a little bit more. It's definitely focused on the client, but he's following them a bit more than the non-directive style that he first started with. And then the third force, the third period is in the 50s and into the 70s when he thought he addressed the necessary and sufficient conditions of therapy. So he set forth a hypothesis that resulted from decades of research, and he had his significant publication, which is On Becoming a Person. So that was 1961, and he addressed the nature of becoming the self that one truly is, an idea he borrowed from a philosopher, Kierkegaard. Remember, Kierkegaard also influenced existentialism with Viktor Frankl. So he published his book, and I have it, and you can get it, and you're going to be very glad that I had you read an original work from Frankl. Because even me, I read it and tried to use it when I was in my PhD program, and it's a lot. So it's great, but I mean, if some people may be better, I'm sure others are better at reading original works than I am, but I think it's important that you do read these works when you can, and that's why I chose the one that I did. But there are original works in these series, and that was his. And you're going to need to know that he wrote on becoming a person. In that book, he described the process of becoming in one's experience. It's the characterized by an openness to experience, a trust in one's experience, an internal locus of evaluation, like locus of control, evaluating what's going on inside, and the willingness to be in the process. He continued to develop that in the 50s and 60s, throughout, published at 61, studying the qualities of the client therapist relationship. So into the fourth phase, and that's the 80s and the 90s. So we're getting up. I mean, research has definitely proven these concepts. You're going to use Rogers' core conditions in every theory at this point. We know that the relationship is central to what we do in the majority of what helps people to effect change, but it's certainly not the only thing. There are other things and definitely skills that need to go along with that. So the fourth phase is more marked by education, starting to educate couples, families, industry, conflict resolution, and the search for world peace. Um, his shift at this point became now known as person-centered approach. So we've gone through these name changes. So we've gone, non-directive, client-centered, and then person-centered. And this shift helped broaden the application of the approach. It's applied to individual and group, family life, leadership, administration, organizational development, healthcare, cross-culturally, interracial activities, and peace relations. So now it is person-centered. Okay, so now you know. I mean, that is something you need to know. So make sure you memorize it. You'll need to know it for the midterm. You're going to need to know the sequence of that. You'll need to know it for CPCE, NCE. Just I know it seems like why, but you have its history and you have to know it. What else do I want you to know about that? I'm not sure. I think I want you also to know about emotion focused therapy. I don't know that I have a slide on that. There's lots of history in the beginning of this chapter that you need to know about. But emotion focused therapy is a person centered approach that is more informed by the role of emotion. So it's like couples therapy, but it's the awareness of the emotion and the reactions of the emotion in that relationship. The EFT practitioner. So emotion focused therapy is used in couples a lot, and there's a whole lot of different activities, experiential activities that help the clients strengthen their self and their ability to cope with emotions, regulate affect, there's that word again, emotion, and create new meaning and new narratives and disrupt the maladaptive past emotional schema. So basically, you've got two clients who are reacting because of past experience, because they're being triggered by their emotions. And so the husband or the wife or the couple or whoever it is, the wife and the wife or whoever the couple is, one is triggering the other and they're triggering their emotion. And so the therapist finds out the deeper meaning. You feel this, so what does that say to you about you? I am what? I am worthless. Well, the spouse doesn't really mean that, but that's what they're, and you go back and you evaluate and you help them to understand the origin and then help them to express a new emotion, a new belief. So it's really powerful. It's very similar to EMDR. You're also going to hear about the third wave of counseling, the fourth wave of counseling, and the different waves of counseling. So I do have the Gloria tape in here, guys. I think I do right here. Look at that. Oh, go Dr. Veal. I just talked about that. Okay. Um, so in the 60s and 70s is when that third force, I said wave, it's force, forces, there's forces, but it's an alternative to psychoanalytic and behavioral. And under this heading falls existential, person-centered, gestalt, and certain other experiential, which is like acting out, activity-wise, and relationship-oriented approach. There are connections between the terms existentialism and humanism. It can be very confusing for all of us. They have much in common, but they have a different philosophical background. Both existentialism and humanism have a respect for the client's subjective experience and the uniqueness of the person. There's trust and a belief that the client can make their own choices, their own changes, and they're in charge of themselves. They also have in common things like freedom and choice, values, personal responsibility. You can read this in your text as I am going along with this. But both approaches place little value on the role of technique and the role of techniques. And they emphasize instead the genuineness of the relationship with the therapist and the client. The difference in that existentialism take the position that we're faced with the anxiety of choosing to create an identity in a world that lacks intrinsic meaning. Existentialists tend to acknowledge the stark realities of the human experience, and their writings are often focusing on death and anxiety, meaningless and isolation. Humanists take a less anxiety-provoking view and more optimistic view of life. So more contemporary existential therapists refer to themselves as existential humanistic practitioners. Their roots are in existentialism, but they've incorporated many of the humanistic psychotherapies that are more current. So I like that, and I think it's important that you understand the difference and the similarities there. What's the parallel and what's the difference? Also, Abraham Maslow contributed to humanistic psychology. He was a pioneer in this, and he is the one who has Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if we take a look at that, I wonder if I have this later. I don't think I do. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a really cool thing. So let's take a peek at that real quick. Here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You see the bottom is physiological needs, food, water, warmth, and rest. If you don't have those basic needs met, it's very difficult to move to the next level, which is security and safety needs. Either one of those are not taken care of, you're not going to go up to psych needs or psychological and self-fulfillment needs. You're going to stay down here in basic needs. If you do not have a place to stay and you're not safe, then you can't move up here to this next level of a hierarchy of needs with belongingness and love, working on relationships and friendships and cultivating those. After that comes prestige and feelings of accomplishment. The need, finally, you get up to self-actualization, which is realizing your full potential, including creative activities, and things like that. Is the central theme of his work of Maslow. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He studied self-actualizing people and found they differed in important ways from so-called normal individuals. The core characteristics are self-awareness, and self-actualization, self-awareness, freedom, honesty, caring, trust, and autonomy. A capacity to welcome uncertainty, acceptance of themselves and others, spontaneity, creativity, a need for privacy. Remember Dr. Real's secret, when you can be alone, you're healthy. Autonomy, deep, intense relationships, genuine care, inner directedness, the absence of artificial dichotomies within self, sense of humor, all are compatible with a person-centered philosophy. This is the hierarchy of needs, and read about that on 169, 170 in your book, making sure you understand that, because I think you can use that a lot just to conceptualize cases really quickly in your head. So clearly we know the relationship is so important. So we know the relationship is really important. And then more recent research has proven that. Do you think it's possible for therapists to conduct truly non-directive therapy? I want you to think about what that would be like. So counseling considerations for person-centered approach. Therapists must trust the client, must establish a certain kind of relationship with the client. We don't choose the goals for the client chooses the goals for themselves. It's more of an attitude in person-centered rather than a technique. You're believing in your client's ability to change. There's a genuine caring, respect, acceptance, support, understanding. I just want you to take a minute and think, how do you feel when somebody treats you this way? How do you feel when someone does these things? The skills of person-centered are congruence, unconditional positive regard, empathic understanding, accurate empathic understanding. So I want you to think about congruence, that you're being genuine with them. You're being authentic and genuine. You might, doing that might mean you express the truth to them about their behavior in a genuine, kind way. Unconditional positive regard, accepting them as they are. It doesn't mean you necessarily align with what they're doing, but you accept them where they are. I'll accept you as you are. This is what I say, how you become non-judgmental. This is how that happens. It's not possible for us to feel this way all the time. If you don't like your client, it's not, the work's not going to help. So you got to find a way to like your client. Accurate empathy. You don't want to get lost in them, but you want to be able to convey to them that you care. Pay attention to them, value them, process their body experience with their nonverbals and verbals. Increase confidence in helping them to choose a way, an actionable choice. Here is Gloria. Let's look at, whoop, it's not behaving as I can. If I can get this linked. I'm going to pause you so I'm not wasting your time. We do save a lot of time by doing it this way. This is Gloria. Carl Rogers. Try to see if I can see it. There we go. So as you watch Carl Rogers, and here the address is in your PowerPoint, so feel free to watch the whole tape. I'm not going to sit here and make you watch that whole tape with me on here, but just want you to notice how he acts toward Gloria, because we're also going to see Fritz Perls for Gestalt. Oh, goodness, who's the other one we're going to see? We shall see. I can't remember right now, but anyway, you will get to see the different. And if you want to like look at this and see them in action, but notice how he treats Gloria, and really watch that and see. So the practice of person-centered, there's a more contemporary practice versus traditional. The traditional was, like I said, highly non-directive, no assessment, no goals, right? And that's what I meant with that activity earlier. Like really think about what would that be like if you were just, how would that be? So more contemporary approach is more active and directive, includes suggestions, not advice, but suggestions, homework, perhaps, and then not a lot of homework heavy, but goals like assessment for managed care purposes. The person-centered approach is often underestimated. Those core conditions are congruence, unconditional positive regard, and empathy, and you need to know those in and out. You will have to answer that question 1,000 times. You need to know what they are. It is beyond just active listening. In fact, your whole attitude is so important when you're doing this technique. Motivational interviewing came out of this, which is a really powerful technique. It is an evidence-based treatment for substance abuse and all sorts of things, and it's based on the stages of change model, and it comes from this. So how do we do it? What are those specific therapy techniques that you would use if those interventions or techniques use interchangeably? Remember, no questions. So it doesn't mean that you don't self-disclose. You may self-disclose minimally with this technique. You're very careful. You express positive regard. So you have to make sure that you are doing that in a way that is authentic and genuine. Making sure the way I like this directly versus non-directly. So non-directly, maybe keeping on time for appointments, remembering what's been discussed in sessions. That's a way that you can help your clients to feel very important. Do it in non-direct ways, empathic understanding. Um, Become at home in the private perceptive world. How would I feel if I were blank? Saying these things using reflection of feelings, like in motivational interviewing, you reflect deep reflections, empathic exploration, clarification of what they're saying if you're unclear. What is the core meaning of the message that they're giving us? Temporarily living and moving about delicately in the client's life, sensing a deeper meaning, carefully going in and being present with the client. You know, I really think this, in conjunction with everything else, is so great. I definitely identify as this theory is definitely probably the core of what it is that I do. EMDR is quite directive, but I don't do it unless I have these things in place. And my empathy, compassion, and genuineness toward the clients is of the utmost importance when I am doing EMDR. I am constantly in flux with person-centered. More modern approaches, of course, are motivational interviewing and emotion-focused therapy. We'll do motivational interviewing in class. We were going to do that for chapter 4, counseling process and foundation. So I think what I'll do is we're going to do some motivational interviewing practice in this class, kind of to kill two birds with one stone. I'm going to practice it together. I'm making a note. Chapter 7 for us for a class for 2 weeks. Motivational interviewing was developed by Miller and Rolnick, who was working with problem drinkers. This is directive, but it's person-centered and it's wonderful for substance abuse. We reflectively listen, express empathy, develop discrepancy between values and current behavior. So when we hear discrepancy in something the client said, so on the one hand, you said you really don't want to go to jail, but on the other hand, you said that you don't want to stop drinking. So help me understand that. So I'm listening for discrepancies in their story, but I'm pointing it out in a non-judgmental way to not put them on the defense. I'm also going to roll with their resistance. I'm not going to confront them. I'm going to roll with that. I'm going to support them. I'm going to empathize with where they are. I'm going to enhance self-efficacy with them by being optimistic and looking for small changes whenever possible. The whole spirit of motivational interviewing is partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. You're not the expert. You're dancing, not wrestling. You're accepting, not judging, creating safety. There's a beautiful little I saw this. What if we had a pair of magical glasses? I saw this at actually like a church service, but please take a minute and watch that because it'll help you to see what I'm talking about with empathy and acceptance and looking past what you see, being compassionate, being actively their cheerleader, and strengths based. Look at what they have and draw it out. Draw out what they already have. Praise what they've got. Like you've gotten here, you've survived. Look at what you've done and how you've made it thus far. The skills of motivational interviewing are go by the acronym OARS, OARS. So you can always remember that, and that will always be a test question. I am so sure these will be important for you to know. Open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizations are the 4 skills in MI. So if you remember those, you will be good to go. So open versus closed questions are really hard. And so when we get back together, we're going, this is open versus closed. Open is not a yes, no. Closed is a yes, no. So we're going to pair up when we get back together and do some activities with open and closed questions. And then some counseling with reflections. So we're going to practice that together. So we're going to role play, and then we're going to move on from there. This goes from stages of change the model. We've learned this already in foundations, which is counseling 5000. So the stages of change that help you in motivational interviewing to determine where that client is. There's a Eureka, which is an assessment that you would use to assess this stage of change model. And those are the stages of change. And if you will recall from my prior lectures, the example of going to start to work out. So I don't need to go over that again. So quickly get out a piece of paper. I want you to think about a change you want to make in your life. Write down this new change. And then instead of standing next to it, I want you to write down what stage of change you're in back on the prior slide. Are you in pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, or maintenance? And then I want you to answer these process questions because I want you to be able to share this when we get back into class. What would it take for you to move to the next stage? What might happen to move you to a previous stage? How is this nonlinear? And thoughts. The multicultural considerations are very, very strong, right? Promoted world peace, but for collectivistic communities that focus on autonomy and self-actualization, it could be counterproductive. So it could be viewed as selfish. So important to note in our group presentation for the people who are presenting on this, who's second, I think we have existential first. When we're back together, these are some of the things you'll want to talk to us about. And some process questions. In your own words, what are the potential implications of the quote, I have no methods, all I do is accept people? What is one way that Roger's theoretical ideas differ from the previous theories studied in class? How would you explain the widespread acceptance of Roger's ideas in the counseling profession? Not the same degree of acceptance in other disciplines? Based upon what you've learned to date, what makes for an effective counseling theory? Here is a video also of Natalie Rogers in her expressive arts therapy. And so you can also please watch that when you have a moment while you're learning about this theory. Also review the case of Stan and Gwen every time you're reading, as when we come back into class together, we will talk about that. I want to know, also want to make sure you understand motivational interviewing and expressive arts. Please make sure you read the book and watch any videos in these lectures. I do perhaps ask questions on test about things in videos to make sure I've built that in so that you're watching the videos, and make sure that you definitely read Stan and Gwen for each chapter.